Nobody expected this. Not the city officials who spent years preparing, not the hotel owners who turned away regular guests to hold rooms for football fans, not the travel agencies that built entire packages around this single month, and certainly not the millions of supporters around the world who dreamed of being here. The 2026 FIFA World Cup, the largest sporting event ever staged in human history, was supposed to trigger an economic explosion across North America. It was supposed to fill every room, every flight, every restaurant, every street corner with the colors and the noise of the world's most beloved game. Instead, something very different is unfolding, and the people watching most closely are starting to ask a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What went wrong? Stay with us because this story reaches far deeper than empty hotel corridors and half-filled stadiums. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how one of football's greatest celebrations became one of its most complicated controversies, and the twist at the heart of it all will genuinely surprise you. Let's go back to the beginning. When FIFA announced that the 2026 World Cup would span 12 cities across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, with 48 nations competing for the very first time, the economic projections were staggering. 6 million fans attending matches, billions of dollars flowing through host communities, hotels at full capacity for weeks, a tourism boom unlike anything North America had seen since the 1994 World Cup, an event still remembered as one of the most joyful sporting summers in American history. That was the plan. That was the promise. But weeks before the tournament kicked off on June 11th, the numbers told a very different story. Across major American host cities, Boston, Los Angeles, Dallas, Philadelphia, and Seattle, reports began to emerge that hotel rooms were not filling. The bookings were falling short. The wave of international visitors that the entire hospitality industry had reorganized itself to welcome was not arriving at the scale anyone had anticipated. In cities like Los Angeles, more than 65% of hotels surveyed reported bookings below their estimated demand. The president of one host city's Convention and Visitors Bureau acknowledged publicly that hotel demand was slower than expected and cited anti-American sentiment overseas as a significant factor. In cities like Boston, Dallas, Philadelphia, and Seattle, it was reported that up to 70% of the rooms FIFA itself had reserved were canceled before the tournament even began. 70%. Think about what that means. Hotels that had raised their nightly rates dramatically, some charging hundreds, others charging thousands of dollars per room during tournament weeks, found themselves in an impossible position. They had turned away ordinary bookings, they had restructured their entire summer calendar around this event, and now the guests were not coming. One senior travel industry executive put it simply and painfully. He said tens of thousands of room nights had simply vanished, and with them not just the revenue from the beds, but from the restaurants, the taxi rides, the shopping, the corporate events, the entire economic ecosystem that surrounds a traveling football fan. A whole economy, he said, evaporated. But this was not merely a story of hotels and balance sheets. It was a symptom of something far larger, because the question everyone was really asking was not where the bookings had gone, it was where the fans had gone. And the answer to that question was both complicated and, in its own way, deeply sad. The American Hotel and Lodging Association issued a striking warning. Despite FIFA having sold 5 million tickets for the tournament, their indicators suggested the anticipated economic lift would fall significantly short of expectations. One assessment described the World Cup as tracking toward and this phrase deserves to be heard clearly, a non-event. For local economies that had waited years and invested enormously, those words landed like a blow. The reasons fans stayed away were multiple and interconnected. We have spoken before about the ticket pricing crisis, the dynamic pricing model that sent costs spiraling, that priced ordinary supporters out of the stadiums they had dreamed of entering, that drew formal legal investigations from the attorneys general of New York and New Jersey. But the hotel and travel crisis had its own layer of causes.
International flights, already complicated by geopolitical turbulence in parts of the world, became significantly more expensive. A Deutsche Bank analysis found that the average price of a transcontinental flight had more than doubled in a matter of weeks, rising from around $167 to more than $400. For a family traveling from Europe or South America, the combined cost of flights, accommodation, and tickets had become almost incomprehensible. And then, as if the financial pressures were not enough, came the security crisis, one that very few people outside political circles had anticipated, and one that very nearly derailed several World Cup fixtures entirely. The small town of Foxborough, Massachusetts, home to Gillette Stadium, one of the tournament's host venues representing the greater Boston area, announced that it had not received federal security funding it had been promised. $7.8 million allocated by Congress as part of a $625 million security package for all 11 American host cities had simply not arrived. Town officials, staring at the approaching tournament with no funds to pay for the policing, the infrastructure, the public safety operations required to host tens of thousands of visitors, did something extraordinary. They threatened to cancel the World Cup matches scheduled at their stadium. Cancel World Cup matches. The threat was ultimately resolved, a deal was reached, the funding eventually came through, but the damage to confidence, the image of a host nation unable to guarantee the basic security arrangements for its own tournament, was already done, and it was not an isolated incident. Similar concerns about funding delays were raised in Miami, in Kansas City, and in other cities across the country. A congressional hearing produced testimony that stopped many in football's community cold. The acting head of the Transportation Security Administration appeared before lawmakers and delivered a warning that combined with everything else to create what officials themselves called a perfect storm. More than 480 airport security officers had resigned since a government funding standoff had begun. Staff were going unpaid. Absences had spiked dramatically, not from laziness, but because, as she told the committee, people simply could not afford to report to work. The result was record-long queues at airports. In some cases, passengers waited more than 4 hours to clear security checkpoints. For international fans already anxious about visa complications, already managing expensive flights and uncertain accommodation, the prospect of hours inside an American airport before even beginning their journey to the stadium was simply too much. And somewhere along the line, for hundreds of thousands of people, the decision was made. It was not worth it. Meanwhile, in the resale ticket market, something paradoxical was happening. FIFA had originally justified its aggressive dynamic pricing by arguing that low prices would simply benefit resellers, that if tickets were cheap, scalpers would buy them and sell them at enormous profit. The organization had publicly declared it would not cap resale prices on its own official platform. The consequences of that decision were extraordinary to observe. A Category 3 seat, not even a premium position for the tournament's opening match, was listed on FIFA's own resale site at more than $5,000 compared to its original face value of $895. And a single seat for the World Cup final was listed at $143,750, more than 41 times its original face value.
$143,000 for a football ticket. And yet, and this is the irony that tells the whole story, other tickets on the resale market were collapsing in value. Prices for more than 90% of World Cup matches were falling on secondary platforms. Some group stage tickets had dropped below $100. The market had spoken. There was not enough purchasing demand to sustain the prices FIFA had engineered. Thousands of tickets remained unsold. Empty seats were projected across multiple venues in the tournament's opening weeks. The stadiums that were supposed to roar with the sound of the world were going to contain, in certain sections, the sound of silence. A World Cup expert who had studied the tournament's economics for years said it plainly. FIFA, he noted, knows that American sports fans typically pay higher prices than anywhere else in the world, and they had deliberately designed their pricing around that assumption. But football fans are not NBA season ticket holders. They are travelers. They are pilgrims. They come from every continent, carrying savings built over years. And when you price them out, they do not simply upgrade. They stay home. In the end, he said, FIFA would have to get people into the stadium, and prices would have to fall to make that happen. They did fall, but the story those falling prices told was not a triumph. It was a reckoning. Because behind every unsold ticket was a person who had once planned to be there. A Dutch supporter who had attended every World Cup for 20 years, who had been to South Africa, to Brazil, to Russia, and who quietly decided this one was not for him. A family in Colombia who had dreamed of seeing their national team on the grandest stage, only to discover that the visa wait alone made the entire journey impossible. A supporters group from England that simply would not travel as a collective for the first time anyone could remember. These were not statistics, they were stories. And the host cities, the people on the ground, the volunteers, the shop owners, the taxi drivers, the families who had hung flags from their windows, were caught between two realities. Their city was hosting the World Cup. The tournament was real, the football was extraordinary. And yet the visitor numbers, the spending, the energy that was supposed to transform their summer, it had arrived, but it had arrived quietly, more modestly than the promises had suggested, more cautiously than the years of anticipation had deserved. The American Hotel and Lodging Association had one word for it: non-event. That word will echo long after the final whistle sounds at MetLife Stadium on the 19th of July. Because the 2026 World Cup was not supposed to be a non-event. It was supposed to be football's greatest chapter, an expanded tournament, a new format, the largest field of nations ever assembled staged across the most powerful and resourceful nation on earth. It had every ingredient for something unforgettable, and the football, when it happened, was precisely that. The goals were real. The drama was real. The emotion inside those stadiums, wherever the seats were filled, was the kind that reminds you why this game has survived everything the world has thrown at it for over a century.